The chamber doors swing open with theatrical precision, and every head turns as one. The clicking of expensive heels on marble echoes through the vast space like a countdown clock ticking toward judgment. Nancy Pelosi enters the House Oversight Committee hearing room at precisely 2:17 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, February 6, 2026, and she enters like someone who still believes she owns the room. At 86 years old, she moves with the practiced grace of a woman who has spent 4 decades navigating the corridors of power, who has stared down presidents and survived every political storm that Washington could conjure. Her St. John knit suit is immaculate, a deep navy blue that cost more than most Americans make in a month. Her signature pearl necklace catches the harsh fluorescent lighting. Her silver hair is styled to perfection, not a strand out of place. Everything about her appearance screams control, authority, untouchability. But something is different today. Something she doesn't yet realize has already shifted beneath her feet like continental plates before an earthquake. Behind her, 3 attorneys follow in formation. Marcus Stein leads the group, silver-haired and distinguished in a charcoal suit that probably cost $5,000. He's been Nancy's lawyer for 15 years, the kind of Washington fixer who charges $2,000 per hour and has defended senators, cabinet secretaries, and Supreme Court nominees. Next to him walks Sarah Kim, younger, sharper, a former Justice Department prosecutor who switched sides for the money. And bringing up the rear is David Chen, the quiet one, the research specialist who knows every congressional ethics rule and loophole by heart. They settle at the witness table with coordinated efficiency. Leather briefcases snap open. Documents arrange themselves in neat stacks. Water glasses fill from the pitcher provided by committee staff. Nancy adjusts her microphone with the ease of someone who has testified before Congress more times than she can count. She's been on both sides of this table, as questioner and questioned, as speaker wielding the gavel, and as witness defending her record. She has survived ethics investigations, Republican witch hunts, media firestorms, and countless attacks on her wealth and her husband's trading activities. She has survived everything. Why should today be any different? But as she looks up at the raised dais where the committee members sit, she notices something that makes her confidence flicker for just a fraction of a second. FBI Director Kash Patel is already seated at a separate witness table to her left, and he's surrounded by bankers' boxes, dozens of them, stacked neatly, labeled with dates and case numbers. His team of agents and financial analysts sit in the rows behind him, each with their own folders and laptops. This isn't the usual setup for congressional testimony. This looks like something else entirely. This looks like a prosecution. The hearing room itself is packed beyond capacity. Every seat is filled despite this being officially a closed-door session. Committee members, their staff, investigators, court reporters, even though the public galleries are supposed to be empty, somehow every available space contains someone who needs to be here. The cameras positioned around the room aren't the usual C-SPAN equipment. These are high-definition recording systems, multiple angles, professional lighting. This testimony is going to be preserved for history, whether Nancy wants it to be or not. Chairman James Comer, Republican from Kentucky, sits at the center of the dais looking like a man who has been waiting for this moment for years. To his right and left, the committee members arrange themselves by party and seniority. The Republicans look eager, almost hungry. The Democrats look uncomfortable, caught between party loyalty and the growing realization that something very serious is about to unfold. Comer gives his gavel once, twice, 3 times. The room falls silent with a speed that suggests everyone present understands the gravity of what's about to happen. This closed-door testimony session of the House Committee on Oversight and Accountability will come to order. Comer's voice carries through the room with practiced authority. We are here today to examine potential violations of ethics rules, securities laws, and criminal statutes related to stock trading by members of Congress and their immediate family members. Specifically, we are investigating a pattern of suspicious trades made by Paul Pelosi, husband of former Speaker Nancy Pelosi, over a 15-year period from 2010 to 2025. Nancy's face remains impassive, but Marcus Stein shifts almost imperceptibly in his seat. That word pattern is deliberate, carefully chosen. Pattern implies system. System implies intent. Intent implies crime. Before we begin questioning the witness, Comer continues, I want to note that we have a special presenter today. FBI Director Kash Patel has been conducting a comprehensive financial investigation at the request of this committee. His team has spent 8 months analyzing trading records, phone logs, congressional schedules, classified briefing attendance, and financial statements. Director Patel has requested the opportunity to present his findings before we question Mrs. Pelosi. 8 months. Nancy's internal alarm system finally starts screaming. 8 months of FBI investigation that she knew nothing about. 8 months of subpoenas and document analysis and witness interviews happening outside her awareness. 8 months of federal agents building a case, while she thought this was just another political circus she could weather with her usual mix of deflection and talking points. Director Patel, Comer gestures to the FBI director with something that looks almost like satisfaction. The floor is yours. Kash Patel stands slowly, deliberately, the way a prosecutor stands when he knows the jury is already leaning his way, and he just needs to lay out the facts. He's 45 years old, dark suit, understated tie, glasses that make him look more like an accountant than a law enforcement official. He spent years as a federal prosecutor before joining the FBI, and he built his reputation on white-collar crime cases. He's the kind of investigator who doesn't chase headlines or political points. He chases evidence, follows money trails, builds cases that are so airtight that defendants plead guilty rather than risk trial. And right now, he's looking at Nancy Pelosi the way a big cat looks at wounded prey. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. His voice is calm, almost gentle, the voice of someone who doesn't need to raise his volume to be heard. Before I begin, I want to establish something very clearly for the record. What I'm about to present is not a political investigation. This is not partisan theater. This is not an attempt to score points or damage reputations. This is a financial crimes investigation conducted by the Federal Bureau of Investigation's White-Collar Crime Division, using standard forensic accounting techniques, subpoenaed financial records, and documented evidence. He pauses, lets that sink in. The distinction matters. Political investigations can be dismissed, spun, explained away with clever talking points and media appearances. Financial crimes investigations are different. They're built on numbers, timestamps, bank records, things that don't care about party affiliation or political skill. Over the past 8 months, Patel continues, my team has analyzed 15 years of stock trading activity by Paul Pelosi. We obtained complete trading records from his brokers at Morgan Stanley, E-Trade, and Charles Schwab. We cross-referenced those trades with Mrs. Pelosi's congressional schedule, with classified briefing attendance logs, with committee hearing dates, with legislation she was personally working on. We subpoenaed phone records for both Nancy and Paul Pelosi. We interviewed their brokers under oath. We conducted forensic analysis of the timing patterns between information access and trade execution. He walks to a display screen that has been set up next to his table, clicks a remote, and a simple graph appears. Net worth over time, 1987 to 2026, a line that starts at 5 million and ends at 240 million. What we found is a systematic pattern of insider trading spanning 15 years and resulting in approximately $140 million in illicit gains. The number hangs in the air like smoke. $140 million, not millions, not tens of millions. 140 million, an amount of money so vast that it can't be explained by luck or skill or smart investing, an amount that demands explanation. Nancy's face remains calm, but her hands have moved under the table where the cameras can't see them. Her fingers are gripping the edge of her chair so tightly that her knuckles have gone white. Marcus Stein is already writing furiously on his legal pad, underlining words, drawing arrows, preparing defenses and counterarguments and procedural objections. But Patel isn't done. He's just getting started. Let me begin with a simple question that goes to the heart of this matter, Patel says, and now he turns to look directly at Nancy. The room follows his gaze. Every eye focuses on the former speaker. Mrs. Pelosi, you entered Congress in January 1987. According to your financial disclosure form from that year, you and your husband had a combined net worth of approximately $5 million. That's substantial wealth. Good for you. Successful business ventures, real estate investments, the kind of prosperity that many Americans aspire to achieve. He clicks the remote again. The graph zooms in on the starting point, 1987, $5 million clearly marked. But today, 38 years later, your net worth is $240 million. That represents a 4,700% increase in wealth. So my question is very straightforward. How? How did you accumulate $240 million on a congressional salary? The question lands like a physical blow, because it's not a complicated question. It's not a gotcha question designed to trap her in a lie. It's just simple arithmetic requesting simple explanation. And everyone in the room already knows there's no good answer. Marcus Stein leans forward, ready to object, ready to deflect. But Patel raises one hand in a gesture that says, wait, let me finish laying this out. Let me be very specific about the math, Patel continues. And now he's clicking through slides that show yearly salary figures, tax returns, business income statements. Your congressional salary in 1987 was $89,500 per year. It has increased over time with cost of living adjustments. As Speaker, you earned $223,500 per year. Over 38 years in Congress, your total congressional salary, if you had saved every single penny, if you had paid no taxes whatsoever, if you had zero living expenses, would total approximately $6.8 million. Another slide. Paul Pelosi's business income year by year. Your husband Paul had various business interests over the years. Real estate ventures, consulting work, investments. We subpoenaed his tax returns for the entire period. His business income, separate from investment returns, has averaged approximately $130,000 per year over the past 20 years. His businesses are largely inactive now. He's 86 years old. He's not building real estate empires or running companies. For the full 38-year period, his business income totals approximately $4.9 million. Patel looks up from his notes. So let's add those numbers together. Your congressional salary over 38 years, $6.8 million. Paul's business income, $4.9 million. Combined earned income, $11.7 million. Even if we assume you're the greatest investors in history, even if we assume you paid no taxes, which you did, even if we assume you had no living expenses, which you certainly did, there is no mathematically possible way to turn $11.7 million in earned income into $240 million in net worth. The numbers don't work. The math doesn't add up. It's impossible. He lets that impossibility sit there for a moment, lets the committee members absorb it, lets Nancy understand that her carefully prepared talking points about hard work and successful investments have just been demolished by simple arithmetic. Unless, Patel continues, and now his voice drops slightly, becomes even more precise, unless you had an edge, unless you knew things that other investors didn't know, unless you were trading on information that the market didn't have access to, then the math works perfectly. Nancy opens her mouth to respond, but Patel is already moving forward, already clicking to the next slide, already building the case brick by methodical brick. Here's what's really interesting about your wealth accumulation, he says, and now the graph changes, shows net worth growth in different colors for different time periods. From 1987 to 2007, a 20-year period, your net worth grew from $5 million to approximately $25 million. That's a 400% increase. Good returns, successful investments, nothing extraordinary. Many Americans who invest wisely over 20 years can achieve similar growth. He clicks again. The graph highlights 2007 forward, and the line shoots upward at an almost vertical angle. But then something changed in 2007. Something dramatic. From 2007 to today, just 18 years, your net worth went from $25 million to $240 million. That's 860% growth in less than 2 decades. That's not good returns. That's not smart investing. That's explosive wealth accumulation that demands explanation. Patel turns away from the screen, faces Nancy directly again. So what changed in 2007, Mrs. Pelosi? What was different? What gave you and Paul the ability to suddenly start generating returns that far exceed anything you'd managed in the previous 20 years? He answers his own question, his voice quiet but relentless. In January 2007, you became Speaker of the House of Representatives. You started attending classified intelligence briefings every single day. You started having advanced knowledge of major legislation before it was public. You started knowing which companies would benefit from government contracts, which industries would face new regulations, which sectors would receive federal subsidies. You started having access to information that could move markets, information that was classified, information that gave you a massive advantage over every other investor in America. The connection hangs in the air, obvious and damning. Before she had access to classified information, normal returns. After she gained that access, extraordinary returns. Correlation so clear it's almost mathematical proof. And your net worth exploded, Patel concludes. Not because you suddenly became a better investor, not because Paul suddenly discovered some secret trading strategy, but because you started trading on insider information. You started using your position, your access, your knowledge of classified matters to generate wealth, and you did it systematically, repeatedly, for 15 years. Nancy's attorney Marcus Stein finally intervenes, his voice sharp with legal precision. Director Patel, this is pure speculation based on correlation. Correlation is not causation. My client and her husband made smart investment decisions during a period of significant market growth. The timing of her speakership is coincidental. But Patel is ready for this. He's been a prosecutor too long to not anticipate every defense. Coincidental, he repeats, and something that might be amusement flickers across his face. Let me show you what coincidental looks like when you analyze it systematically. He walks back to his table, picks up a thick binder, opens it to a marked page. The FBI analyzed every single stock trade Paul Pelosi made from 2010 to 2025. We obtained complete records from all his brokerage accounts. 387 total trades over 15 years. For each trade, we documented the date, the amount, the specific securities purchased or sold, the holding period, and the return on investment. Then we cross-referenced each trade with Mrs. Pelosi's official schedule. When did she attend classified briefings? When did she participate in closed-door legislative negotiations? When did she receive material non-public information about pending regulations or government contracts? He displays a massive spreadsheet on the screen, color-coded, meticulously organized. Of those 387 trades, 138 occurred within 1 week of Mrs. Pelosi receiving material non-public information. Those are highlighted in red on this chart. 138 trades where Paul somehow knew to buy or sell at exactly the right moment, right after Nancy had access to information that would impact the market. Patel clicks to another slide showing performance metrics. Now here's where it gets really impossible to explain as coincidence. The average return on those 138 suspicious trades, 41%. These weren't long-term holds. Average holding period was 3.2 months. These were short-term trades designed to capture quick gains from information advantages. 41% returns in 3 months, consistently, repeatedly, over 15 years. He pauses for effect. For comparison, Warren Buffett, widely considered the greatest investor in human history, has averaged 20% annual returns over his 60-year career. Your husband apparently does twice that well, but only on specific trades. Only on trades that happen to coincide with you receiving non-public information. Another slide appears showing different performance metrics. But here's the truly damning pattern. The other 249 trades, the ones where Mrs. Pelosi had no obvious information advantage, trades involving companies unrelated to her committee work, industries Congress wasn't legislating on, sectors not affected by pending bills. Average return on those trades, 8.2%. That's actually slightly below the S&P 500 average during the same period. So Paul Pelosi is a below-average investor who occasionally, mysteriously, becomes twice as good as Warren Buffett. The only variable that explains this performance difference is whether his wife had inside information. The logic is airtight, mathematical, undeniable. No amount of legal wordsmithing can explain away the statistical impossibility of what the data shows. Nancy's face has gone tight, her jaw clenched. This isn't how these hearings usually go. Usually she can deflect with broad answers about portfolio diversity and long-term investment strategies. But Patel isn't asking broad questions. He's presenting forensic analysis that makes deflection impossible. Let me show you the timing pattern, Patel continues, and now he's clicking through a series of timelines, each one showing the same basic structure repeated over and over. On average, Paul Pelosi executed trades 2.7 days after Mrs. Pelosi attended a relevant briefing or received material information. Not the same day. That would be too obvious, too easy to prove. Not weeks later, because by then the information would be public and the advantage would be gone. Specifically 2 to 3 days. Just long enough to create some plausible deniability, just short enough to capture the maximum profit from the information edge. He shows example after example, each one following the identical pattern with mechanical precision. December 15, 2020. Mrs. Pelosi attends classified briefing on Operation Warp Speed and vaccine approval timeline. December 17, 2 days later, Paul buys $5 million in Pfizer call options. March 19, 2020. Mrs. Pelosi attends classified briefing on COVID-19 economic severity projections. March 21st, 2 days later, Paul sells $5 million in airline, hotel, and cruise line stocks right before the market crashes. August 1st, 2022, Mrs. Pelosi finalizes plans for her controversial Taiwan trip. August 3rd, 2 days later, Paul buys $4 million in semiconductor stocks that would benefit from supply chain concerns. Example after example, the same 2 to 3 day window appearing with such regularity that calling it coincidence becomes absurd. 138 times, Patel says, and his voice has taken on the rhythm of a prosecutor delivering a closing argument. 138 times this exact pattern appears, classified briefing or sensitive meeting. 2 to 3 days later, Paul trades. Market moves in their favor. Profit. Over and over and over. That's not luck. That's not sophisticated analysis. That's not coincidence. That's systematic insider trading following a deliberate, careful pattern designed to maximize profit while minimizing the appearance of impropriety. Nancy tries to interrupt, but Patel raises his hand again. I'm not done, Mrs. Pelosi. I haven't even shown you the most damning evidence yet. He walks back to his table, picks up another document, waves it slightly in the air like a prosecutorial flag. We subpoenaed phone records, both your cell phone and Paul's cell phone. Complete call logs for the past 5 years, including dates, times, duration, and recipient information. And we found something very interesting. A new chart appears on the screen showing phone call patterns. On average, you call Paul 2 to 3 times per week. Normal spousal communication. That's what we'd expect. But on days when you attend classified briefings or sensitive meetings, something changes dramatically. On those specific days, you call Paul 94% of the time within 2 hours of the briefing ending. 94%. Almost every single time you receive classified information, you immediately call your husband. He lets that sink in, then continues. And what happens after you call Paul? Within 1 hour of your call to him, Paul calls his broker at Morgan Stanley, and within 24 hours of that broker call, a trade executes. This pattern appears in 64 of the 138 suspicious trades. We can literally trace the flow of information from classified briefing to you, to Paul to broker to trade to profit. Marcus Stein tries again. These are privileged spousal communications. Director, You're asking this committee to speculate about the content of private conversations between a wife and husband. I'm not speculating about anything, Patel responds calmly. I'm documenting a pattern. When your client receives classified information, she calls her husband. Her husband then calls his broker. Profitable trades then execute. This happens 64 documented times. At some point, pattern becomes proof. When something happens once or twice, that's coincidence. When it happens 64 times following the exact same sequence, that's a system. He pulls out a specific call log, magnified on the screen so everyone can read the timestamps. Let me walk through one specific example in excruciating detail. December 15th, 2020. This is the Pfizer trade, and it's impossible to explain as anything other than pure insider trading based on classified information. The timeline appears minute by minute. 9:00 a.m. Eastern Time. Mrs. Pelosi enters a SCIF, a sensitive compartmented information facility, for a classified briefing on Operation Warp Speed. The briefing covers the FDA approval timeline for Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine. This information is classified. The market doesn't know when approval will be announced. Analysts are speculating it could be weeks or months away. The briefing reveals that approval will come the very next day. This information, if known publicly, would obviously impact Pfizer's stock price dramatically. 11:45 a.m. The briefing ends. Mrs. Pelosi returns to her office in the Capitol building. 12:17 p.m. Mrs. Pelosi calls Paul Pelosi, cell phone to cell phone. The call lasts 11 minutes. 1:03 p.m. Paul Pelosi calls his broker, Richard Chen, at Morgan Stanley. The call lasts 8 minutes. 2:30 p.m. The trade executes. Paul Pelosi purchases $5 million in Pfizer call options. Strike price $40, expiring in 3 months. This is a massive, aggressive bet that Pfizer stock is about to jump significantly in the very near term. Next day, December 16th, 9:00 a.m., the FDA announces emergency approval for Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine. Stock price jumps from $42 to $54 within hours. Paul's call options are suddenly worth $8.7 million. Profit: $3.7 million in 48 hours. Patel looks up from the timeline, looks directly at Nancy Pelosi. 48 hours from classified briefing to $3.7 million in profit. The timing is absolutely perfect, impossibly perfect. So perfect that there's only one possible explanation. You attended a classified briefing where you learned the FDA would approve Pfizer's vaccine the next day. You called your husband. You told him what you learned. He called his broker. He bought call options that would only be profitable if the approval came immediately. And it did, because you knew it would. Because you'd been told in a classified briefing. The room is completely silent now. Every person present understands they're watching something historic, something that will be studied in law schools and political science classes for generations. The systematic destruction of a political legend through simple, relentless presentation of documented facts. Nancy finally speaks, her voice tight with controlled anger. This is speculation. This is connecting dots that don't connect. My husband makes his own investment decisions based on publicly available information and his own analysis. Then explain the timing, Patel says immediately, not giving her a chance to regroup. Classified briefing in the morning about FDA approval. Trade that same afternoon. Approval announcement next morning. 3.7 million profit in 48 hours. What publicly available information told Paul to make that specific trade at that specific moment? Silence. What Wall Street Journal article? What CNBC interview? What analyst report suggested the FDA approval would come in the next 24 hours? Silence. Why the urgency? Why did Paul text his broker, need to move fast on Pfizer right after you called him? What created that urgency if not information you just received? Silence. Nancy's attorneys are huddled together now, whispering frantically, scribbling notes, trying to figure out how to respond to evidence that seems to answer itself. Patel returns to his presentation, moving with the confidence of someone who knows the prey is wounded and it's time to press the advantage. Let me show you 4 more examples. 5 total trades that are absolutely impossible to explain except through insider trading. He clicks through slides showing detailed timelines for each trade, the pattern identical every time. Trade number 2. March 2020, the COVID crash. Mrs. Pelosi attends multiple classified briefings on COVID-19 severity and economic impact projections. These briefings detail how devastating the shutdown will be, information the public doesn't have yet. Market analysts are still saying it will be a minor disruption. But Nancy knows better because she's been told in classified briefings exactly how bad it's going to be. March 19th through 21st, Paul Pelosi sells $5 million in airline stocks, hotel chains, cruise line operators. The exact sectors that will be devastated by the shutdown. March 23rd, the market crashes. Those sectors drop 30 to 50%. Average investors lose billions. Paul Pelosi avoids $2.1 million in losses because he sold at the peak, right before the crash, right after Nancy attended briefings that told her exactly how bad things were going to get. Trade number 3. July 2021, the infrastructure bill. Mrs. Pelosi is personally negotiating the massive infrastructure legislation. She knows exactly which companies will receive federal contracts, which provisions will benefit which industries. This information hasn't been made public yet. The bill is still being drafted in closed-door sessions that she's leading. July 19th, Paul buys $2 million in Caterpillar stock, Tesla stock, and various construction company stocks. The bill passes months later with provisions that specifically benefit those exact companies. Caterpillar gets massive federal contracts for equipment. Tesla benefits from electric vehicle charging infrastructure. Construction companies get billions in projects. Paul's portfolio jumps by $4.8 million because he positioned perfectly in the companies that would benefit most from legislation his wife was personally crafting. Trade number 4. November 2021, the semiconductor subsidies. Mrs. Pelosi is working on the CHIPS Act, $70 billion in federal subsidies for semiconductor manufacturers. She knows this bill is going to pass and which companies will benefit most. Paul buys $4 million in NVIDIA call options before the bill's details are made public. Months later, the bill passes with massive subsidies that send semiconductor stocks soaring. NVIDIA, which makes the chips that power artificial intelligence and gaming, is a primary beneficiary. Paul makes $3.2 million because he knew exactly what was coming. Trade number 5. August 2022, the Taiwan trip. Mrs. Pelosi is planning a controversial official visit to Taiwan. She knows this will create international tensions with China. She knows this will affect semiconductor supply chains because Taiwan produces most of the world's advanced chips. She knows how markets will react. Before she announces the trip publicly, Paul buys $4 million in NVIDIA and Taiwan's semiconductor manufacturing company. She announces the trip. China threatens military response. Semiconductor stocks jump on supply chain concerns. Paul makes $2.8 million by positioning ahead of a geopolitical crisis that his wife was personally creating. Patel steps back from the screen, spreads his hands in a gesture that says, "Look at all this evidence. How can anyone deny what it shows?" 5 trades. 5 perfect examples of timing that cannot be explained by analysis or luck or public information. In every single case, Paul Pelosi somehow knew exactly what was going to happen before the market did. And in every case, it happened right after Nancy Pelosi had access to non-public information about that exact situation. He walks toward Nancy's table, not threateningly but purposefully, a prosecutor closing distance with a witness who has no good answers left. "Mrs. Pelosi, these aren't coincidences. This isn't your husband being a sophisticated investor. This is systematic insider trading. This is you using your position, your access to classified information, your role in crafting legislation, to generate massive personal wealth. You and Paul made $140 million by betraying the public trust, by exploiting information that was classified to protect national security and to ensure fair markets. Nancy starts to respond, but Patel continues, unstoppable now. And I haven't even shown you the most damning evidence yet. He pulls out another document, this one a deposition transcript, bound and official. We gave immunity to Paul's broker, Richard Chen, senior investment advisor at Morgan Stanley. He's managed Paul's account for 12 years. We told him we had evidence of insider trading, and he could either cooperate or face prosecution as a co-conspirator. He chose cooperation. He provided detailed testimony under oath about his communications with Paul Pelosi, and he provided his contemporaneous notes from client calls. Patel opens the transcript, begins reading, his voice taking on the formal tone of sworn testimony. This is Richard Chen's testimony under oath before a federal grand jury. Question: did Paul Pelosi ever indicate to you where he was getting information for trading decisions? Answer: yes, multiple times. Question: what did he say? Answer: he would call me with specific instructions, and he would say things like, Nancy says the infrastructure bill will pass with these provisions. Or, Nancy says the semiconductor subsidies will be larger than expected. Or, Nancy says regulation will be lighter than expected. He specifically attributed the information to Nancy, to his wife, multiple times over the years. Patel looks up from the transcript. Direct attribution. Not I think, or my analysis suggests, or I predict, Nancy says. Your husband told his broker that you were giving him the information. That's direct evidence of tipping, of you passing classified or material non-public information to your husband for the purpose of trading. He pulls out handwritten notes, magnified on the screen. These are Richard Chen's notes from a January 21st, 2023 phone call with Paul about a Microsoft trade. Chen wrote, and I'm quoting directly, client says wife attended meetings about AI policy. Client says Nancy indicated regulation will be light touch, favorable to major tech companies. Client wants to buy $3 million in Microsoft calls. That's your husband telling his broker that you, by name, told him about regulatory policy that wasn't public yet, and he wanted to trade on that information. Marcus Stein is on his feet now. Mr. Chairman, this is hearsay testimony from a broker who was given immunity in exchange for implicating our client. His notes are self-serving and potentially fabricated to avoid prosecution himself. But Patel has anticipated this too. We corroborated every piece of Chen's testimony. We pulled the trading records. They match his notes exactly. We pulled the phone records. Every call he described is documented with timestamps. We cross-referenced with Mrs. Pelosi's schedule. Every meeting he mentioned corresponds to actual briefings she attended. His testimony isn't self-serving speculation. It's documentary evidence backed up by independent verification. He clicks to a comprehensive chart showing everything connected, timelines and phone calls and trades and profits, all color-coded and cross-referenced. Let me tie this all together. Let me show you 15 years of insider trading in one comprehensive timeline. The chart fills the entire screen, overwhelming in its detail, devastating in its clarity. 1987, you enter Congress with $5 million in net worth. 1987 to 2007, 20 years, normal wealth growth to 25 million. Good returns, nothing extraordinary. 2007, you become speaker. You start attending classified briefings daily. 2007 to 2010, net worth jumps to 40 million, 15 million in just 3 years. 2010 to 2020, this is the most dramatic period. Net worth explodes from 40 million to 175 million. 135 million in wealth accumulation in 1 decade. During this exact period, Paul made 63 trades that we've identified as likely insider trading based on your classified information access. Those 63 trades generated approximately $87 million in profits. 2020 to 2025, net worth continues growing to 240 million, another 65 million. During this period, Paul made 41 suspicious trades generating approximately $38 million. Add it all up, and the pattern is undeniable. Your wealth grew exponentially when you had access to classified information. The trades that made the most money happened right after you attended classified briefings. This isn't circumstantial. This isn't correlation without causation. This is direct, documented, systematic insider trading spanning 15 years and generating $140 million in illicit profits. Patel closes his binder with a snap that echoes through the silent hearing room. That's not public service, Mrs. Pelosi. That's not sophisticated investing. That's corruption. That's using your position for personal enrichment. That's betraying the public trust in the most fundamental way possible. You swore an oath to serve the American people. Instead, you served yourself and your husband, turning classified briefings into trading signals and turning your congressional office into a profit center. The room remains silent for a long moment after Patel finishes. The evidence hangs in the air like an indictment waiting to be read. Chairman Comer finally breaks the silence. Mrs. Pelosi, Director Patel has presented extensive evidence suggesting a pattern of insider trading based on your access to classified information and material non-public information about pending legislation. I want to give you an opportunity to respond. How do you explain these patterns? How do you explain the perfect timing of these trades? How do you explain your husband's impossibly high returns exactly when you had information advantages? Nancy looks at her attorneys. Marcus Stein, Sarah Kim, and David Chen huddle around her, whispering urgently. She can hear fragments of their advice, legal strategies, and damage control and procedural options, but the bottom line is clear. They have no good explanation for the evidence. The timing is too perfect. The pattern is too clear. The phone records too damning. The broker testimony too specific. They whisper for what feels like hours but is really only 90 seconds. Finally, Nancy straightens in her chair, looks directly at Chairman Comer, and speaks in a voice that's steady despite everything. My husband makes his own investment decisions based on publicly available information and his own analysis. I am not involved in his trading activities. We maintain separate finances. These alleged connections between my official duties and his investment timing are pure speculation. It's the answer her lawyers told her to give. The safe answer, the defensible answer, the answer that doesn't admit anything. But even as the words leave her mouth, she knows how hollow they sound in the face of Patel's evidence. Patel doesn't even wait for Comer to recognize him. He just speaks, his voice carrying that prosecutorial certainty that comes from knowing the witness has nowhere left to hide. Then explain the Pfizer trade specifically, Mrs. Pelosi. You attended a classified briefing in the morning about FDA approval timing. That same afternoon, Paul bought $5 million in call options that would only be profitable if approval came immediately. The approval came the next morning. He made $3.7 million in 48 hours. What publicly available information told him the approval would come that fast? Silence from Nancy. Explain the COVID trades. You attended classified briefings about how severe the economic impact would be. 2 days later, Paul sold travel stocks right before the market crashed. What publicly available information told him to sell at that exact moment? Silence. Explain why your husband's broker testified under oath that Paul said, Nancy says, before multiple trades. What does that mean if you weren't giving him information? Silence. Explain the phone pattern. Why do you call your husband 94% of the time within 2 hours of classified briefings? And why does he then call his broker within an hour? And why do profitable trades then execute within 24 hours? What explains that pattern 64 times if not information transfer? Silence. Explain how Paul, who has no professional trading background, who doesn't subscribe to professional research services, who doesn't use a Bloomberg terminal, somehow generates returns twice as good as Warren Buffett, but only on trades that coincide with you receiving non-public information. Nancy's face is flushed now, her composure finally cracking. She's been in politics for 4 decades, has faced countless hostile hearings, has survived every attack and scandal and investigation. But she's never faced someone who came prepared like this, who built a case this airtight, who had this much documentary evidence. Marcus Stein tries to intervene. Mr. Chairman, Director Patel is badgering the witness, asking her to speculate about her husband's investment process, demanding she explain coincidences that don't prove anything criminal. But Kummer shakes his head. These aren't coincidences, counselor. 138 trades, all perfectly timed, all highly profitable, all correlated with your client receiving non-public information. At some point, pattern becomes proof. Your client can answer the questions or she can invoke her rights, but she can't simply deny that the pattern exists when we're all looking at 15 years of documentary evidence. Patel pushes forward, sensing victory, sensing that Nancy has no escape route left. Let me ask more directly, Mrs. Pelosi. Did you share information from classified briefings with your husband? It's the question that matters, the only question that matters. Everything else is preamble. This is the moment where she either admits it or invokes the Fifth Amendment or commits perjury. Nancy looks at her attorneys again. They huddle one more time, whispering even more frantically than before. She can see the calculation in their eyes. If she says no, Patel will present more evidence that proves she's lying, and then she's added perjury to insider trading. If she says yes, she's admitting to a federal crime. There's only one option left. I invoke my Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. The words hang in the air like a confession. The room erupts in gasps, murmurs, shocked whispers. Committee members lean forward in their seats. Staff members exchange glances. The court reporter's fingers pause on her stenography machine for just a second before continuing to record. Nancy Pelosi, former Speaker of the House, third in line to the presidency for years, the most powerful woman in American politics for 2 decades, is taking the Fifth Amendment rather than answer questions about insider trading. Patel's expression doesn't change, but there's satisfaction in his voice when he continues. Let the record reflect that the witness has invoked the Fifth Amendment regarding whether she shared information from classified briefings with her husband. Mrs. Pelosi, did you tell your husband about the Pfizer vaccine approval before it was made public? I invoke the Fifth Amendment. Did you tell him about COVID economic projections from classified briefings? I invoke the Fifth Amendment. Did you tell him which companies would benefit from the infrastructure bill before that information was public? I invoke the Fifth Amendment. Did you tell him about semiconductor subsidies before they were announced? I invoke the Fifth Amendment. In those 64 phone calls you made to Paul within 2 hours of classified briefings, calls that were followed by profitable trades, what did you discuss? The weather, your grandchildren, or the classified information you just learned? Nancy's voice is barely a whisper now. I invoke my Fifth Amendment right. Patel turns to the committee, addresses them directly. She's invoking her right against self-incrimination because answering truthfully would incriminate her for insider trading. She can't say no because the evidence proves she did share information. The phone records, the timing, the broker testimony, it all proves information transfer. And she can't say yes because that would be admitting to multiple federal crimes. So she takes the Fifth, which is her constitutional right, but which also tells us everything we need to know. He returns to his seat, gathers his materials. No further questions, Mr. Chairman. The evidence speaks for itself. 138 suspicious trades, perfect timing, 140 million in profits, phone records showing information flow, broker testimony about direct tipping, and a witness who won't answer basic questions about whether she shared information with her husband because doing so would incriminate her. This is the clearest case of congressional insider trading in American history. Chairman Kummer looks at Nancy with something that might be pity. Mrs. Pelosi, do you understand how this looks? You're taking the Fifth on questions about whether you shared classified information with your husband for the purpose of stock trading. You won't explain the timing patterns. You won't explain how your wealth exploded after you became Speaker. You won't explain the phone calls or the broker testimony or any of it. The implications are devastating. Marcus Stein makes one last attempt at damage control. My client is exercising her constitutional rights. The Fifth Amendment exists precisely for situations where the government engages in overreach and tries to twist innocent conduct into criminal activity. This isn't overreach, Kummer interrupts sharply. This is an 8-month FBI investigation that found 138 suspicious trades, documented phone records showing information flow, sworn testimony from brokers about direct tipping, and mathematical impossibility in the wealth accumulation. Your client can invoke her rights, but she can't prevent this committee from drawing reasonable conclusions from overwhelming evidence. He looks at his fellow committee members, Democrats and Republicans alike, and sees the same realization on all their faces. This isn't political theater anymore. This is a criminal case that's been laid out in excruciating detail. Based on the evidence presented today, Kummer says formally, this committee makes the following preliminary findings that will be included in our final report to be released publicly next month. He reads from a prepared statement, but his eyes keep returning to Nancy, watching her face as each finding lands like a hammer blow. 1. Former Speaker Nancy Pelosi and her husband Paul Pelosi engaged in a pattern of stock trading over 15 years that shows undeniable correlation with her access to classified information and material non-public information about pending legislation. 2. 138 trades generated approximately $140 million in profits that appear to be based on insider information that was not available to ordinary investors. 3. Phone records document a clear pattern of Nancy Pelosi calling Paul shortly after classified briefings and sensitive meetings, followed by Paul calling his broker, followed by profitable trades that benefited from the information discussed in those briefings. 4. Paul Pelosi's broker provided sworn testimony that Paul specifically attributed trading information to Nancy, saying Nancy says before multiple trades, which constitutes direct evidence of tipping. 5. The former speaker invoked the Fifth Amendment rather than answer questions about whether she shared classified information with her husband, which this committee views as strong evidence that answering truthfully would incriminate her. 6. The mathematical impossibility of accumulating $240 million in net worth on congressional salary and legitimate business income, combined with the explosive wealth growth that coincided exactly with gaining access to classified information, supports the conclusion that the wealth was generated through insider trading. Kummer pauses, lets each finding settle into the record, then delivers the conclusion. Therefore, this committee refers this matter to the Department of Justice for criminal investigation and potential prosecution of both Nancy Pelosi and Paul Pelosi for insider trading, securities fraud, conspiracy to commit securities fraud, and wire fraud. We also refer this matter to the Securities and Exchange Commission for civil enforcement action and disgorgement of unlawfully obtained profits. We recommend the House Ethics Committee investigate for historical record purposes, and we recommend Congress immediately pass comprehensive legislation banning all stock trading by members of Congress and their immediate family members, to be known as the Pelosi Act, because this case demonstrates exactly why such a ban is necessary to restore public trust. The gavel comes down 3 times, sharp cracks that sound like judgment being rendered. This session is adjourned. The witness is excused. Nancy Pelosi sits motionless at the witness table for a long moment. The hearing room is clearing around her. Committee members filing out, staff packing equipment, reporters rushing to file stories about the most dramatic congressional hearing in years. Her attorneys are gathering their materials, whispering among themselves about next steps and legal strategies and damage control. But Nancy just sits there, staring at nothing, understanding with complete clarity that her life as she knew it is over. She'd walked into this room thinking she could handle it the way she'd handled everything else, with political skill, carefully crafted soundbites, deflection, and the sheer force of personality that had carried her through 40 years in Washington. She'd survived Republican attacks before, ethics investigations, media scrutiny, countless attempts to bring her down. But Kash Patel hadn't come with political attacks. He'd come with evidence, math, phone records, trading timestamps, broker testimony, Documentary proof that couldn't be spun away or explained with clever talking points. He'd built a criminal case, not a political narrative, and criminal cases don't care about your skill at media appearances or your relationships with powerful people. She'd taken the Fifth Amendment because she had no choice. Couldn't lie because the evidence would prove it. Couldn't tell the truth because it would be confession. So she'd hidden behind constitutional rights, and in doing so, she'd basically admitted everything without actually saying the words. Nancy finally stands slowly, like she's aged a decade in the past 5 hours. Her attorneys flank her as she walks toward the exit. The clicking of her heels on marble sounds different now. Not confident, not powerful, just tired. Outside the hearing room, the press is waiting. Cameras, microphones, shouted questions that blend into incomprehensible noise. Mrs. Pelosi, why did you take the Fifth? Did you trade on insider information? Will you resign? How do you explain the 140 million? Her lawyers push through the crowd. No comment, repeated like a mantra. They get her into a waiting car, and it pulls away from the Capitol building that had been her domain for so long. She doesn't know it yet, but the hearing transcript is already leaking. Within hours, every major outlet will have the story. By tomorrow, it will dominate every news cycle. Her taking the Fifth will be the headline, played on loop, analyzed and dissected and turned into political talking points. Within a week, the consequences will begin cascading like dominoes pushed by an inexorable force she can't control. 6 hours after the hearing ends, the full transcript leaks to multiple news organizations simultaneously. It's supposed to be confidential, at least until the committee's final report is released, but someone with access decided the public needed to know immediately. Maybe a Republican staffer eager to damage Democrats. Maybe a Democratic staffer trying to get ahead of the story. Maybe one of Patel's FBI team who believes sunshine is the best disinfectant. It doesn't matter who leaked it. What matters is that by midnight, the entire world can read every word of Nancy Pelosi taking the Fifth Amendment 100 times rather than explain her husband's trading. CNN runs it as breaking news with a chyron that reads, Pelosi invokes Fifth Amendment on insider trading questions. MSNBC tries to be more balanced, but can't escape the basic facts. Fox News treats it like vindication of everything they'd been saying for years. Even the New York Times and Washington Post, traditionally friendly to Nancy, run front-page stories that are devastating in their clinical recitation of the evidence. Former Speaker Pelosi declines to answer questions about husband stock trades, reads the Times headline, and the story beneath it lays out Patel's case in damning detail. The phone records, the timing patterns, the broker testimony, the mathematical impossibility of the wealth accumulation, the Fifth Amendment invocations. Within 24 hours, Nancy Pelosi has gone from elder stateswoman to criminal defendant in the court of public opinion. Even Democrats who defended her for years are suddenly finding reasons to distance themselves. If she has nothing to hide, why take the Fifth? Asks a progressive congressman from California who'd once called her a hero. The evidence Director Patel presented is troubling and demands answers. Taking the Fifth just makes it look worse. The Speaker of the House, a Democrat who'd served under Nancy and owed his position partially to her support, issues a carefully worded statement. These are serious allegations that deserve full investigation. No one is above the law, regardless of their service or position. We must restore public trust in Congress. Translation: Nancy is on her own. Republican leaders are gleeful, calling for immediate criminal prosecution. This is the smoking gun we've been looking for, says House Minority Leader. Nancy Pelosi got rich by selling out the American people, by turning classified briefings into trading signals. She needs to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. But the real damage comes from former allies, from people who'd worked with Nancy for decades, suddenly discovering a principled opposition to congressional insider trading. I've always been uncomfortable with members trading stocks, says a Democratic senator who'd never mentioned the issue before. The Pelosi case shows exactly why we need comprehensive reform. I'm introducing legislation tomorrow to ban all congressional stock trading. The political calculus is obvious. Nancy is toxic now. Anyone defending her will be painted as corrupt themselves, as protecting congressional insider trading, as putting party over principle. So everyone runs away, creating distance, issuing statements about ethics and accountability, and nobody being above the law. Nancy watches it all unfold from her San Francisco home, sees her 40-year career collapse in real time on television screens. Every talking head discussing her trades, every analyst going through the evidence, every news cycle dominated by her downfall. And worst of all, she knows they're right. Patel's evidence is overwhelming. She did exactly what he accused her of. She did use classified information for trading. She did get rich off insider knowledge. She just never thought anyone would build the case this comprehensively, would follow the money this carefully, would dare to go after Nancy Pelosi this aggressively. Within a week, the Department of Justice announces a formal criminal investigation. Not just preliminary review, but a full grand jury investigation with subpoenas already being issued. Attorney General makes a public statement, his tone grave and formal. The Department of Justice takes allegations of corruption and insider trading by public officials with the utmost seriousness. Based on the evidence presented to the House Oversight Committee and on independent investigation by the FBI, we have initiated a criminal probe into stock trading activities by former Speaker Nancy Pelosi and her husband Paul Pelosi. Grand jury subpoenas have been issued for trading records, phone records, and testimony from relevant witnesses. This investigation will be thorough, impartial, and guided by the evidence wherever it leads. Translation: Nancy is going to be indicted. The Securities and Exchange Commission follows 2 days later with its own announcement. Civil charges being filed against both Nancy and Paul Pelosi, seeking disgorgement of $140 million in allegedly unlawful trading profits, plus penalties, plus interest. The SEC complaint is a legal document running over 200 pages, but it reads like a prosecutor's indictment, laying out 15 years of suspicious trades with the same clinical precision Patel had used. Nancy's brokerage accounts get frozen pending the outcome. Her ability to access her wealth, to liquidate assets, to move money around, suddenly locked down by court order. She's still theoretically worth $240 million, but she can't touch most of it. Her attorneys scramble to respond, filing motions and issuing statements, and trying to control a narrative that's already escaped their control. Marcus Stein appears on CNN to defend his client, but even he sounds half-hearted. Mrs. Pelosi denies any wrongdoing. Her husband made independent investment decisions. The timing patterns are coincidental. She looks forward to clearing her name. The host immediately counters with Patel's evidence. But counsel, how do you explain 138 trades all perfectly timed with classified briefings? How do you explain the broker testimony that Paul said, Nancy says, before multiple trades? How do you explain the phone records showing information flow from classified briefing to Nancy, to Paul to broker to trade? Stein has no good answers, just legal bromides about presumption of innocence and burden of proof and waiting for all facts to emerge. Nobody watching believes him. 2 weeks after the hearing, Nancy announces she will not seek re-election in 2026. The statement is brief, carefully worded by attorneys, free of any admission. After 40 years of service to the people of San Francisco and to our nation, I have decided it is time to step back and allow new leadership to emerge. I am proud of what we have accomplished together and grateful for the trust the people have placed in me. I will continue serving out my current term and will work to ensure a smooth transition to my successor. The statement doesn't mention the insider trading investigation, doesn't mention the FBI evidence, doesn't mention taking the Fifth Amendment. It pretends this is a normal retirement decision by an 86-year-old politician who's had a long career. Nobody buys it. Every news story about her retirement announcement leads with the context. Under investigation for insider trading, Nancy Pelosi announces she won't seek re-election. Her Democratic colleagues in the House issue polite but distant statements thanking her for her service. Nobody rushes to her defense. Nobody says the investigation is unfair or that she's being persecuted. They all know what the evidence shows, and they all know defending her would be political suicide. Within 3 weeks of the hearing, the grand jury issues subpoenas to everyone involved. Paul Pelosi's broker Richard Chen is called to testify, repeats under oath everything he'd told the FBI. Other brokers who'd handled Pelosi trades get subpoenaed. Morgan Stanley, E-Trade, Charles Schwab all turn over complete records. The Pelosi's accountant gets subpoenaed, brings years of tax returns and financial statements. Congressional staffers who'd worked in Nancy's office get subpoenaed, asked about her schedule, about classified briefings she'd attended, about phone calls she'd made from her office. Most cooperate fully, not wanting to risk obstruction charges by protecting their former boss. The investigation is moving fast, driven by the fact that Patel had already done 8 months of preliminary work. The FBI has the evidence. They just need the grand jury to review it and issue indictments. 4 weeks after the hearing, Paul Pelosi's attorneys reach out to the Justice Department to discuss a possible plea deal. Paul is 86 years old, facing decades in prison if convicted on all charges, watching his wife go down with him because of trades he'd made on her information. His attorneys know the evidence against him is overwhelming. The broker testimony alone would convict him. And that's before considering the phone records and the trading patterns and Nancy's Fifth Amendment invocations. The negotiations take another 2 weeks, but the outcome is inevitable. Paul agrees to plead guilty to 12 counts of securities fraud, the most egregious trades from 2019 to 2024. He agrees to cooperate fully against Nancy, to testify about every conversation where she'd given him information, every phone call after a classified briefing, every instance of her telling him about pending legislation or regulatory decisions or government contracts. In exchange, he gets 18 months in federal prison, given his age and health, and the fact that he's cooperating. He agrees to pay $82 million in restitution and fines, essentially half of everything they'd made from the suspicious trades. And he agrees to forfeit the Napa Valley vineyard they'd owned for 30 years, the one where they'd hosted countless political fundraisers, where presidents and senators and tech billionaires had gathered to support Democratic causes. The plea hearing is brief, Paul looking small and old and broken in front of the federal judge. He answers the required questions in a quiet voice. Yes, Your Honor, I did trade on material non-public information provided by my wife. Yes, I knew it was illegal. Yes, I did it anyway because the profits were substantial and I thought we wouldn't get caught. The judge asks him directly, did your wife Nancy Pelosi provide you with classified information and material non-public information for the purpose of stock trading? Yes, Your Honor. Multiple times over many years. She would call me after classified briefings and tell me what she'd learned, what was going to happen with regulations or legislation or government contracts. I would then trade on that information. Every word is recorded, officially part of the federal record, will be used against Nancy when her case goes to trial. With her husband cooperating, testifying against her, Nancy's position becomes untenable. Her attorneys know it. She knows it. There's no viable defense strategy when your co-conspirator is going to take the stand and describe in detail how the scheme worked. 2 months after Patel's hearing, 3 months after the initial FBI presentation, Nancy Pelosi's attorneys negotiate their own plea deal. The alternative is a trial where Paul testifies against her, where all the evidence gets presented to a jury, where she'd face 50 or 60 criminal counts and potentially life in prison at 86 years old. The plea agreement is harsh but better than the alternative. Nancy agrees to plead guilty to 38 counts of securities fraud and insider trading, representing the worst examples from the past 15 years. She agrees to full allocution, meaning she has to stand in court and describe what she did. She agrees to pay $127 million in fines and restitution, essentially everything she'd made from the suspicious trades. She agrees to forfeit her congressional pension. the taxpayer-funded retirement she'd earned through 40 years of service, but forfeited through 40 years of corruption. And she agrees to 8 years in federal prison. The sentencing hearing is held in Federal District Court in San Francisco, the city Nancy had represented for decades. The courtroom is packed with reporters, former colleagues who come to watch her fall, FBI agents who'd built the case, and ordinary citizens who'd followed the story and wanted to see justice served. Judge Sarah Martinez presides, a no-nonsense jurist appointed by Obama, someone who'd once admired Nancy Pelosi but now views her with the cold judgment of the law. Nancy stands before the bench in a simple dark suit, no expensive jewelry, no perfect hairstyling, just a tired 86-year-old woman who knows she's about to go to prison. Her attorneys flank her, but there's nothing they can do now except wait for sentence. Judge Martinez reviews the evidence, the plea agreement, the pre-sentencing report prepared by probation officers. Then she looks at Nancy and begins to speak, and her words are brutal in their simple truth. Mrs. Pelosi, you stood before me to plead guilty to 38 counts of securities fraud and insider trading. You admitted that over a 15-year period, you used your position as Speaker of the House to gain access to classified information and material non-public information, and you shared that information with your husband for the purpose of illegal stock trading. You made approximately $140 million through this scheme. You betrayed the public trust in the most fundamental way possible. You held one of the highest positions in our government. You were third in line to the presidency. You took an oath to serve the American people, to uphold the Constitution, to put the public interest above your own. Instead, you treated your office as a profit center. You turned classified briefings meant to protect national security into trading signals meant to enrich yourself and your husband. You used information about pending legislation that you were personally crafting to make trades that would benefit from that legislation. You exploited your position systematically, repeatedly, for over a decade. The law is clear on this matter. Insider trading is a crime. It undermines faith in fair markets. It gives unfair advantages to those with access to non-public information. When a member of Congress does it, when someone in a position of public trust does it, the crime is even more serious because it betrays not just market integrity but democratic integrity. I've read the pre-sentencing report. I've reviewed the evidence. I've considered the arguments of both sides. I've weighed your age, your health, your decades of public service. But I've also weighed the severity of your crimes, the length of time you engaged in this conduct, the massive amounts of money you obtained illegally, and your apparent lack of remorse even after pleading guilty. Judge Martinez pauses, looks directly at Nancy. In the interview you gave to the Washington Post while awaiting sentencing, you said, and I quote, "I regret getting caught. I regret that it ended this way, but I don't regret the trades themselves." You said you believe members of Congress should be able to use inside information for trading. Those statements demonstrate a complete failure to understand the wrongfulness of your conduct. You still believe you were entitled to profit from your position. You still believe the rules don't apply to you. That attitude, that sense of entitlement, is exactly what makes a significant sentence necessary. Not just to punish you, but to deter others who might think they can exploit public office for private gain. The message must be absolutely clear. Public office is not a path to personal wealth. Classified information is not a trading advantage. No one, regardless of their power or position or years of service, is above the law. Therefore, Mrs. Pelosi, you are sentenced to 8 years in the custody of the Federal Bureau of Prisons. You are ordered to pay $127 million in fines and restitution. You will forfeit your congressional pension, and you will serve your sentence without possibility of early release except for standard good time credits. The gavel comes down. 8 years. At 86 years old, she'll be 94 when she gets out if she lives that long. Nancy shows no reaction, just nods slightly, as if she'd expected this. Her attorneys immediately file notice of appeal, but everyone knows it's futile. She pleaded guilty. She admitted everything. There's nothing to appeal except the sentence length, and 8 years for stealing $140 million through insider trading is actually lenient by federal guidelines. 2 weeks later, Nancy Pelosi enters the Federal Correctional Institution at Alderson, West Virginia. It's a minimum security women's prison, the same facility that once housed Martha Stewart for insider trading, though Martha's crimes were trivial compared to Nancy's. The Bureau of Prisons assigns her to Alderson because of her age, and because she's not considered a violent offender, though the irony of sending her to a prison nicknamed Camp Cupcake isn't lost on anyone. She arrives in a prison van, wrists shackled, wearing an orange jumpsuit because her designer suits have been left behind. The guards process her like any other inmate. Strip search, medical exam, psychological evaluation, assignment to a cell block, issuance of prison uniform and bedding and toiletries. Everything that made her powerful, her clothes and jewelry and connections and political skills, stripped away. She's just another federal prisoner now, number 98,724,083, serving 8 years for securities fraud. Her cell is 8 feet by 10 feet, concrete block walls painted institutional beige, a narrow bed with a thin mattress, a small desk bolted to the wall, a toilet and sink in the corner. She shares this space with a cellmate, a woman 20 years younger serving time for embezzlement. The cellmate recognizes Nancy immediately, but the prison culture is clear. Everyone's equal inside. Your crimes don't matter, your former status doesn't matter. You do your time and you don't cause problems. Nancy adapts slowly. She's assigned to work in the prison library, cataloging books and helping other inmates with legal research. She attends mandatory programs on financial ethics and personal responsibility. She eats in the cafeteria with everyone else, standing in line for institutional food that bears no resemblance to the expensive restaurants she'd frequented. She wears the same khaki prison uniform as everyone else, no makeup, her gray hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. And she watches television in the common room, sees the political world move on without her. Congress passes the Stop Trading on Congressional Knowledge Act 2, immediately nicknamed the Pelosi Act. It bans all stock trading by members of Congress and their spouses. Any violations result in automatic expulsion from Congress and criminal prosecution. The bill passes the House 418-2, the Senate 97-3, the largest bipartisan majority for any legislation in years. Even progressives who defended Nancy vote for it, because the evidence of her corruption was too overwhelming to ignore. The president signs it in a rose garden ceremony, standing before cameras with members of both parties, speaking about restoring public trust and ensuring no one is above the law. He doesn't mention Nancy by name, doesn't need to. Everyone knows this law exists because of her, because of what she did, because of how thoroughly she betrayed the public trust. Nancy watches the signing ceremony on the common room television, sees her former colleagues applauding, sees the president holding up the signed bill for cameras, and understands that her legacy is being written in real time. She won't be remembered as the first female Speaker of the House, as the crafty politician who navigated decades of Washington battles, as the progressive champion who fought for health care and climate policy and workers' rights. She'll be remembered for this. The law that bears her name, the law that exists because she couldn't resist turning her office into a profit center. 6 months into her sentence, a reporter from the Washington Post secures a rare prison interview through the Bureau of Prisons Public Affairs Office. The reporter is young, wasn't even born when Nancy entered Congress, has no personal loyalty to or memory of her glory days. The interview takes place in a small conference room, Nancy in her prison khakis, sitting across a metal table from the reporter who holds a digital recorder and notepad. "Do you have any regrets?" the reporter asks. Nancy is silent for a long time. The question hangs there, waiting for the answer everyone watching this saga wants to hear. Remorse, acknowledgement of wrongdoing, understanding that what she did was fundamentally corrupt. But that's not what comes out. "I regret getting caught," she finally says, and her voice has that familiar edge of defiance that characterized her political career. "I regret that it ended this way, but I don't regret the trades themselves. Paul and I worked hard our entire lives. We deserve to be wealthy. We deserve to enjoy the benefits of my position and his investment skill." The reporter looks stunned, as if unable to believe she's hearing this. "You don't think what you did was wrong? I think the laws are unfair," Nancy responds, and now she's leaning forward, speaking with conviction like she's arguing a position on the House floor. "Members of Congress should be able to invest. We have bills to pay like everyone else. We have families to support, retirements to plan for. If we happen to know things because of our position, because we attend briefings or work on legislation, why shouldn't we be able to use that information? Why should we be worse off financially than people in the private sector who can trade however they want?" The reporter tries again. "But the information you had was classified. It was meant to protect national security, not to give you a trading advantage." "Then they shouldn't have told me," Nancy says sharply. "If they didn't want me to know, they shouldn't have brought me into those briefings. But they did, because I needed that information to do my job. And once I had it, why couldn't I use it? The rules don't make sense." The interview creates a firestorm when it's published. Even people who'd been sympathetic to Nancy, who'd thought maybe the sentence was too harsh for a woman her age, turn against her completely. The absolute lack of remorse, the sense of entitlement, the belief that she was justified in stealing $140 million because she deserved to be wealthy, it's too much. Even her most loyal defenders abandon her. Her daughter Christine gives an interview to CNN a week later, clearly trying to distance herself from her mother's crimes and the continuing damage to the family name. "My mother has always believed rules don't apply to her," Christine says, and there's sadness in her voice but also anger. She spent 40 years in politics believing she was above accountability, that her position and power protected her from consequences. Even now, even sitting in federal prison, she doesn't think she did anything wrong. She genuinely believes she was entitled to that money, entitled to trade on classified information, entitled to use her office for personal enrichment. It's sad, and it's exactly why she's where she is. Paul Pelosi serves his 18 months in a minimum security facility in California, much closer to home than Nancy. He's released at 87, broken and bankrupt. The restitution and fines took everything. The San Francisco mansion, the Napa vineyard, the investment accounts, the artwork collection, the cars, all of it liquidated to pay what they owed. He moves into a modest one-bedroom apartment in Dali City, lives on Social Security, about $1,800 a month, the same amount millions of Americans survive on. He dies 6 months after his release. Heart attack at 87, alone in his apartment, found by a neighbor 2 days later when mail started piling up. The New York Times runs an obituary, but it's brutal in its honesty. Paul Pelosi, 87, trader who profited from wife's inside information, dies. The obituary recounts his role in the scheme, the broker testimony, his eventual cooperation and guilty plea. It mentions his death clinically, notes that he'd lost everything, that his later years were spent in poverty after decades of wealth. There's no sympathy, no warm remembrances of his business accomplishments or his philanthropy, just the facts of his crimes and his downfall. Nancy remains in federal prison, serving her 8 years. With good behavior credits, she might be eligible for release at 92 if her health holds. Her attorneys file multiple motions for compassionate release, arguing she's elderly and poses no threat and has serious health issues that prison medical facilities can't properly address. Every motion is denied. Judge Martinez writes a particularly harsh opinion on one such request. Mrs. Pelosi seeks compassionate release based on her age and health. She argues that keeping an 88-year-old woman in prison serves no penological purpose, but this court disagrees. Mrs. Pelosi showed no compassion for the American people she betrayed for 15 years. She showed no remorse even after conviction. In a prison interview, she said she didn't regret the crimes themselves, only getting caught. She said she believes she was entitled to use classified information for trading. That attitude demonstrates exactly why she needs to serve her full sentence. Release would send the wrong message. It would suggest that powerful people can commit massive fraud and escape full punishment because of age or status. The defendant will remain in custody. Nancy watches from prison as the political world completely forgets about her except as a cautionary tale. The 2026 midterm elections come and go. The 2028 presidential election. A new generation of politicians rises, none of whom owe her anything, most of whom barely remember her except from history books and ethics classes. Law schools teach her case in white-collar crime classes. The Pelosi trading scandal becomes a classic example of insider trading prosecution, studied alongside Martha Stewart and Raj Rajaratnam and other famous cases. Business schools teach it in corporate governance classes, discussing congressional ethics and conflicts of interest. Political science classes teach it as an example of corruption and the importance of institutional safeguards. The lesson is always the same. Nancy Pelosi had everything: power, prestige, a historic career, respect from both parties, a legacy that should have been admirable. But she couldn't resist using her position for personal enrichment. She turned classified briefings into trading signals. She made $140 million by betraying the public trust. And when confronted with evidence, she took the Fifth Amendment, then pleaded guilty, then went to prison still believing she'd done nothing wrong. Students write papers analyzing where she went wrong, not the insider trading itself, which was obviously illegal from the start, but the arrogance that made her think she could do it so blatantly and never face consequences. The belief that her political skills would protect her. The assumption that no one would ever build the kind of comprehensive case that Kash Patel eventually built. She thought she was untouchable. She thought her power and connections and political skill made her immune to accountability. She thought she could make 138 suspicious trades over 15 years, and nobody would notice the pattern. She was wrong. The FBI did notice. They did the math. They mapped the timelines. They pulled the phone records. They got the broker to testify. They built a case so airtight that Nancy had no defense except taking the Fifth, which in itself was basically an admission. And all that wealth she'd accumulated, the $240 million, the mansions and vineyards and investment accounts, all of it went away, forfeited, paid in restitution, liquidated to pay fines. She'll leave prison penniless, depending on Social Security like Paul did, living in whatever low-income housing she can find if she lives long enough to be released at all. Her political career, which should have been her legacy, is now just context for her crimes. First female Speaker of the House, yes, but also systematic insider trader. Historic legislator, yes, but also corrupt to the core. Powerful woman in American politics, yes, but also someone who couldn't resist exploiting that power for personal gain. The footage of Patel presenting his evidence is shown in congressional orientation sessions for new members. This is what happens when you trade on insider information. This is what happens when you think the rules don't apply to you. This is why we have the Pelosi Act, why you and your spouses are banned from trading stocks, why violations result in expulsion and prosecution. Nancy Pelosi had said throughout her career that sunlight is the best disinfectant, that we should follow the money to understand corruption, that no one is above the law. In the end, someone followed her money. Someone shined sunlight on her trades. Someone proved that even she, with all her power, wasn't above the law. She spent 40 years in politics saying the right things about ethics and accountability. And she spent 15 of those years systematically violating everything she claimed to believe. The phone records don't lie. The trading timestamps don't lie. The mathematical impossibility of accumulating that wealth on congressional salary doesn't lie. Kash Patel built his case not with rhetoric or political attacks, but with evidence. Numbers, dates, phone logs, broker testimony, forensic accounting. The kind of evidence that can't be spun away or explained with clever talking points. Nancy tried. She took the Fifth rather than answer questions. She pleaded guilty rather than face trial. She went to prison rather than risk decades more time if convicted on all charges. And from her cell in federal prison, watching the world move on without her, she finally understands what she should have known all along. The money wasn't worth it. $140 million can't buy back your freedom when you're 86 years old and serving 8 years. It can't restore the legacy you destroyed. It can't make people forget that you betrayed their trust in the most fundamental way possible. She thought she was being smart, using her position to get rich while she could, assuming she'd retire wealthy and respected and spend her final years in comfort. Instead, she's prisoner 98,720-4083, wearing khaki uniforms, eating institutional food, sharing a cell with an embezzler, watching her name become synonymous with congressional corruption. The Pelosi Act will outlive her. Long after she's gone, members of Congress won't be able to trade stocks because Nancy Pelosi couldn't resist turning classified briefings into trading signals. Her name will be attached to ethics legislation forever, not as the author but as the reason the law exists. That's her legacy now, not the first female speaker, not the historic legislator, not the progressive champion, just the politician who got caught, who got rich off insider trading, who took the fifth when asked to explain the impossible coincidences, who went to federal prison still believing she'd done nothing wrong. She'd spent 40 years saying follow the money. Finally, someone did, and it led straight to her.